Hello and welcome back to another installment of the Winning Agenda's Hero Spotlight series. My name is Jesse Marshall and I'm really excited to be diving into what is undoubtedly one of the fan favorite heroes in Flesh and Blood, although one that probably hasn't seen as much competitive success as some others. It does have some downsides, it does have some drawbacks, but it's also got, I think, a really high skill ceiling and a lot of creativity about it in terms of the way you play it. And a lot of that comes from the various options that the key cards give you. And that is Azalea Ace in the Hole, our current only Ranger hero, although of course we have seen Lexi, the new Ranger from the new series, from the new set, I should say, recently spoiled from Tales of Aria. So I'm sure a Lexi Hero Spotlight will be coming in good time. But for now, Azalea is, I think, a really interesting hero with some really interesting options, and certainly sounds like she's going to get some more options in Tales of Aria shortly in terms of further Ranger cards. So the first thing I think to get our head around with Azalea is some of the complexity that comes from Azalea's hero ability itself, Death Dealer being, I think, the most powerful bow, and a lot of people's kind of consensus seems to be that a lot of people have settled on Death Dealer over the other option in Redliner, and Skullbone Crosswrap, which is the legendary Ranger head equipment that synergizes really, really well with Azalea's ability. So you've got three things that in some ways seem to work really well together here, but there's a lot of awkwardness, and you actually need a lot of the other cards in your deck to make these things function together. So first up, we've got Azalea's hero ability, which says, once per turn action, pay 0 resources, put a card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck. If you do, put the top card of your deck face up into your arsenal. If it's an arrow card, it gains dominate until end of turn, go again. So note here that the card you put from your arsenal on the bottom doesn't have to be face up or face down. It's just any card that's in your arsenal, you put it on the bottom, get rid of it, and take the top card from your deck and put it face up on your arsenal. If it is an arrow, it gains dominate until end of turn, which is a pretty big bonus. Death Dealer has a once per turn action, 1 resource. If you have no cards in your arsenal, you may put an arrow card from your hand face up in your arsenal. If you do draw a card, go again. So 2 important things to mention here. One is both Azalea and Death Dealer mention arrows, and arrows are the unique Ranger attack type, which can only be played from arsenal. And Azalea has a lot of cards, not just arrows, but also her defense reactions, traps, which can only be played from arsenal. So Azalea's ability and Death Dealer's ability both get cards into your arsenal. Azalea refreshes the card that's in there and replaces it and gives it dominate if it's an arrow. Death Dealer lets you put a card into an empty arsenal, but it has to be an arrow. The other great thing about Death Dealer is that it's actually a source of card advantage, which is very powerful on a weapon, because it says, for that 1 resource that you pay, if you've pitched a yellow or a blue, you're only using part of a card's resources to pay for Death Dealer's ability. You're then putting a card from your hand into your arsenal, and you can still use that card that's in your arsenal this turn, but you get to draw a replacement card. So basically you're trading the resource card you've pitched, which if it's a yellow or a blue, is giving you a profitable rate of return because you've still got resources floating and you've drawn a fresh card from Death Dealer. So it can be really powerful if you can set up the right things in your turn, which we'll come to later. Skullbone Crosswrap says once per turn action, turn a face down card in your arsenal face up, opt 1, go again. So this is really good if you can get a card face down into your arsenal, which Death Dealer doesn't do, but lots of other cards in the deck will do. Or if you can start the turn with a card in your arsenal from your last turn, you can turn it face up with Skullbone Crosswrap, then you get to opt. You can put a powerful arrow, hopefully, on top of your deck. There's a powerful arrow on top of my deck, great, I'll leave it there. Then you can use Azalea's ability to put the card that you've just flipped face up in your arsenal onto the bottom of your deck and put that powerful arrow into your arsenal, give it dominate, and you're away to the races. So Skullbone Crosswrap interacts well if you've already got a card in your arsenal from the turn before, or if you can find a way to get a card face down into your arsenal, which Death Dealer doesn't do, and which Azalea also doesn't do. So you have to find other ways to do that. So moving on, Redliner is the other option for a weapon. It's similar to Death Dealer, but it doesn't have to draw a card. It also doesn't cost the resource. So basically for 0 resources, you get to put an arrow card from your hand face up into your arsenal. I prefer Death Dealer because the resource positivity of it most of the time, as long as you're pitching a yellow or a blue, is actually going to be a lot better than the resource neutrality of Redliner. So with Redliner, you've got resource neutrality, you don't have to worry, but it means you're not pitching as many cards. One, that means you're not able to stack the bottom of your deck as effectively, which is something we'll come to as well later with Azalea that can be really important because you can actually set up some really potent later turns. But secondly, not having the option to, if you pitch a yellow or a blue, actually gain resource positivity or a benefit from your weapon means that Redliner is just, to me, not as attractive as Death Dealer. So the next element to Azalea, as I mentioned, we need to find ways to get cards face down into our arsenal in order to be able to activate the Skullbone Crosswrap often and profitably, to then look for the right cards on top of our deck to leave there for Azalea's ability. So it's kind of this multifaceted kind of shuffle around that you need to be doing in order to make the best use of Azalea and Skullbone Crosswrap. Now, you don't need to be doing those things every turn, right? But having cards that are reloaders in your deck allows you to get face-down cards into your arsenal, which can be useful from time to time. So the first one we've got here is Take Cover. It's a Ranger Defense reaction, which you're going to play on your opponent's turn. It defends for 4, so it's very much like Sink Below or Fate Foreseen, a 0 for 4 red defense reaction. But it's got this ability Reload. If you have no cards in your arsenal, you may put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal. Now that can be any card, right? So that can be an arrow or another card. So Take Cover is a really powerful, really potent part of this deck and is very, very useful. Rapid Fire is another one. It's a yellow, 0-cost ranger action. It says, until end of turn, arrows you control gain Go Again, Reload, and it's got Go Again, so it doesn't take up your action point for the turn. Reload is really useful. Firstly, you can pitch it early as a yellow to feed your Death Dealer and start having some early turns. But then later on in the game, once you get through your pitch stack and you're back to your rapid fires, if it goes that long, you can set up some really potent late turns with things like 3 of a kind. So rapid fire can work really, really nicely. Then we've got other options for reload as well, which we'll come to later. But one of them, Poison the Tips is one. So it's a 0-cost ranger action. Until end of turn, arrows you control gain. If this hits a hero, they discard a card. Reload and Go Again. So this doesn't take your action for the turn. It's got Go Again itself. It gives your arrows this additional disruptive ability. If it hits, the opponent discards a card, so very much like a pummel. And it's got Reload, which means you get to put something face down into your arsenal. You can then either use it if it's a good arrow that you've got in hand, or you can activate your Skullbone Crosswrap, see if there's a better arrow on top of your deck, and then if there is, give that arrow Dominate so that your Poison the Tips ability is more likely to go off because you've given your arrow Dominate with Azalea's ability. So Poison the Tips gives you a really good on-hit trigger, which as we know is really, really important in Flesh and Blood to incentivize blocking and try and disrupt your opponent's turn as well and punish them for not blocking. But it also has this ability to reload and play into your macro strategy and synergize well with things like Skullbone Crosswrap. Bullseye Braces is one of the ranger pieces of equipment, so it starts on the battlefield. It's got Arcane Barrier 1, which is really nice in some matchups, obviously having natural Arcane Barrier on your equipment. It's also got this ability to destroy it, cost no resources. If you have no cards in your arsenal, you can put an arrow card from your hand face up in your arsenal. It gains +1 strength till end of turn. So this is really useful. We'll come a little bit later to ways that it's not exactly like a reload because it's not face down, so you can't get that Skullbone Crosswrap activation, but it is a way to get cards into your arsenal without playing a card, which can be very useful in combination with 3 of a kind, which we'll come to a little bit later. And it allows us to set up, using our equipment, a couple of big turns over the course of the game. So the next section of the video, I want to talk a bit about some of the arrows. So we've kind of looked at some of the ways you can get the arrows into your arsenal using Death Dealer, using Azalea's ability, or using reloaders. But I wanted to look at what are some of the actual payoffs that you're getting for doing all this work. So Headshot is a 1-cost 4-strength attack, but if it's put into your arsenal face up, it gains +2 strength till end of turn, and then it's a 1 for 6. That's obviously a pretty good rate of return. That's well above average in terms of the benefit you're getting for that 1 resource you're spending on the Headshot. 6 damage is really great, but you need to put it face up. You can do that with your Death Dealer, with your weapon, which is great. Or there are some other ways in the deck, like the gloves that you can use to get it in there as well. But Headshot is just a nice vanilla action. costing 1, there's a big difference between the arrows that cost 1 and cost 0, because on the turns where you do have a lot of reds in hand, where you pitch for Death Dealer, and you're kind of card neutral, having to then pitch another card for a 1 cost arrow is obviously a lot worse than just being able to play a 0 cost arrow. So you do need to be a little bit discerning and make sure you've got the right balance between 0 and 1 costs, or you play a few more yellows to make it more likely that you're hitting more yellows. So that's just something to think about as well as we go through the arrows. Searing Shot is really good because it's a 0 cost arrow. It's a 0 for 4, and if it hits, they lose an additional 1 life. So it's basically a 0 for 5 if it hits. Being at 4 is a really good break point because it's much harder to block a 4 attack than a 3 attack with 1 card. Obviously, there are defense reactions that do it, and they can use equipment to supplement their 1 card to block. But, as a pretty run-of-the-mill standard attack, being a 0 for 4 that threatens additional damage, that's pretty good. So those are our kind of basic damage arrows. And then we've got what are probably the more important payoffs for being Azalea, and that is the disruptive arrows. So the ones that actually disrupt your opponent's turn if they hit. And this is very similar to, I mentioned a similarity to Guardian at the start of the video. Guardian's got the crush abilities where if you deal 4 damage with them, then they do this additional disruptive effect to your opponent. The advantage to Azalea, although the attacks aren't as strong, you only need to hit with 1 damage in order to get the disruptive effect. So Red in the Ledger is the kind of most powerful, strongest Azalea attack. It's incredibly crippling against decks like Chain or even Bolton that are wanting to go wide, or even Dash. It says if Red in the Ledger hits a hero, they can't play or activate more than 1 action during their next turn. So that's non-attack actions, weapons, attack actions, everything. They can't do more than 1 of them during their turn. So this is a massive disadvantage and a really massive penalty if they let the Red in the Ledger hit. It's a 1 for 5, but remember, if you can get it off the top of your deck into your arsenal with Azalea's ability, you can give it Dominate. And blocking a 5 damage Dominate attack can be quite difficult for many opponents. Hamstring Shot is another one that's a bit disruptive. It's a 1 for 5 again, and it says if it hits a hero, their first attack during their next turn costs an additional resource. So this is obviously not as powerful and not as restrictive as Red in the Ledger, but it does mean that first attack they play, which maybe they only want to play 1 attack, it costs an additional resource, which can be quite taxing and may prevent them from doing what they want to do on their turn, particularly if they've already blocked a couple of times, and you can Hamstring Shot as your last attack. If you can kind of go wide on a turn and finish off with a Hamstring Shot and hit them, then it can actually stop them from doing anything on their turn. So that 1 additional resource can be quite powerful. Noting that Hamstring Shot only affects attacks, it doesn't affect non-attack actions, which is quite important. Sleep Dart is a 1 cost 5 strength attack at red, although the yellows are also quite good at 1 for 4. If it hits a hero, they lose all hero card effects and activated abilities until the end of their next turn. So you treat their hero text box like it's empty. So that's massive against Bolton. It stops Bolton from being able to give go again. It basically straight up kills Levia in the late game. If you hit Levia with a Sleep Dart, they've basically got to kill you the next turn, or her hero ability is going to kill her if they've got a bit of blood debt sitting there, basically. So Sleep Dart can be huge against Levia. It's pretty big against Chain. It can stop them making a Soul Shackle and basically deprive them of a whole action point on the following turn. And there are plenty of other options as well in terms of other heroes that it has a pretty big impact against. Obviously, side them out against Dash and don't play them against Dash, where it pretty much does nothing, but it's a really strong ability to be able to shut down their hero card for a turn. Remorseless is another one like Red in the Ledger that can have a really huge impact on Chain. It doesn't shut them down completely, but it says if it's put into your arsenal face up, until end of turn it gains defense reactions can't be played from arsenal to its chain link. So it's got a bit of a bonus in terms of them not being able to play defense reactions from arsenal, which makes it a bit more likely to hit against decks like Guardian. And that ability triggers if you put it into your arsenal face up. So if you use your Azalea ability or if you use your ARROV ability, then Remorseless gets that bonus to make defense reactions harder to play against it. And it says if it hits a hero until the end of their next turn, whenever they play an action card, they lose a life. So obviously amazing against Chain in the mid to late game when they're going to be playing, 6, 7, maybe 8 action cards on their turn, but also really strong against Dash in terms of those high octane turns. and even taking an extra 2 or 3 damage off Bolton can just be massive. So it's any action card, non-attack or attack action, and really punishing those decks that are trying to go wide against you. So utility arrows, these are arrows that can, rather than disrupting your opponent, they can give you an advantage or a benefit. So Endless Arrow is a 0 for 4. It says, if Endless Arrow hits, put it into your hand. So it's just a nice piece of card advantage, because if you spend your whole turn doing a few things, Endless Arrow is your last attack, goes back to your hand, you get to Arsenal, start the next turn with a pretty powerful arrow in your arsenal, which is much better than starting the next turn with an empty arsenal, because you can, Skullbone Cross-Trap at the start of your next turn, or do a variety of other things. On a rapid fire turn, obviously Endless Arrow is extremely powerful, because as long as you can keep reloading it and getting it into your arsenal, then you can keep attacking with it, because it has go again from rapid fire. So there's sort of a natural combo there, although obviously you're going to run out of ways to get it into your arsenal eventually. Ridge Rider Shot is a 0 for 4. So again, another one of those 0 cost arrows, which can be really helpful. And it says, if it's put into your arsenal face up, opt 1. So Ridge Rider Shot is one of those ones that, like the Skullbone Cross-Wrap, gives you the ability to try and set up your Azalea ability a bit better. Although Ridge Rider Shot doesn't require a reload card to work. If you use your Death Dealer to put the Ridge Rider Shot into your arsenal face up, then it triggers its ability. So it's much easier to get off and just gives you a bit more flexibility in terms of getting your Azalea hero ability off. Sikkim Shot is a 1 for 4, so a little bit below rate. If you remember, the Reds, like Hamstring Shot, is a 1 for 5. It's a common, and it's got a really good on-hit effect. Sikkim Shot is a bit less powerful as a 1 for 4, but it does have go again. So it can sort of set up a few more regular go wide turns, but if you're looking for more of a combo-oriented go tall strategy, then Sikkim Shot may not be the one for you, given the 1 resource cost and the 4 damage. So it's an interesting one to try and work into your deck. Pathing Helix is more of a combo piece as well. It works very well with Three of a Kind, which we'll come to in a minute. It says it's a 0 for 4, and it says, if it hits and you have no cards in your arsenal, you can put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal. So it basically gives you a free reload if it hits, which can be really, really nice, as we'll come to in a moment with Three of a Kind, because on a Three of a Kind turn where you've drawn your cards, you can't then play anything except cards from arsenal. So if you're confident that you can get a Pathing Helix to hit at some point in that turn, when you're trying to kind of combo off, the Pathing Helix can give you basically a free reload to set up your next attack and allow you to keep playing those cards rather than ending your turn. So Arsenal Synergies. A lovely piece of art here. So it's just absolutely gorgeous, very sort of Van Gogh-ish almost. Anyway, Plunder Run. So there are a range of cards like Plunder Run which give you a benefit if they're played from Arsenal, and most heroes have to sort of sequence a turn in advance to take advantage of that ability, whereas when you're Azalea, you've got the ability to put these cards into your arsenal using your reload cards, so you can actually get advantage from them more quickly. So for instance, if you've got a Plunder Run in your hand, and you play like a Poison the Tips, you get the Poison the Tips buff, you put the Plunder Run into your arsenal using the reload, then you play the Plunder Run, then you use your Death Dealer to put a big arrow in your arsenal, attack with the big arrow, and then you've got the Plunder Run ability live, you've got the Poison the Tips ability live, or even better, you've got the Rapid Fire ability live. For example, if Rapid Fire was the first card you played instead of Poison the Tips, then you've got Rapid Fire, so your arrow that you're playing has go again. If it hits, you draw a card, you can kind of set up these wide turns. So as you can see, leveraging these cards like Plunder Run that have a bonus when they're played from Arsenal, in combination with your Rapid Fires and your Poison the Tips and your other reload cards, can let you set up some bigger turns. Promise of Plenty is another really nice one that works in this vein. So if you can reload it into your arsenal, it's then a 0 for 3 attack that has go again because it's played from Arsenal. And if it hits, each hero who doesn't have a card in their arsenal puts the top card of their deck face down in their arsenal. So you get a free reload if it hits. So it really incentivizes blocking, and it's got go again because you've played it from arsenal. So it just is a really nice addition to those turns. So these cards like Plunder Run, Promise of Plenty, and Scour the Battlescape are really great ways to supplement your turns basically increase the impact of what you're doing, whilst really playing nicely into what your other cards are allowing you to do efficiently. Because remember, take cover, the reload ability on that is just a bonus. It's a 0 for 4 defense reaction, which is a fine rate. And you get that reload. If you can then turn that basically into an action point by playing a Scour the Battlescape or a Promise of Plenty off that reload, then you're getting really good benefit from that, well above rate. So, Scour the Battlescape, you may put a card from your hand in the bottom of your deck if you do draw a card, so you've got some nice filtering there. And if it's played from Arsenal, it gains Go Again. So similar to Promise of Plenty, just a bit of a different bonus. So ways that you can go wide. Rapid Fire, which I've already mentioned, gives you all your arrows this turn Go Again, and it's got reload, so you can start off that chain using that reload ability. Very powerful. Sikkim Shot, mentioned earlier, can also allow you to go wide. Ravenous Rabble is another really kind of crucial card in Azalea, and it's more powerful the lower your resource curve, so the more reds you're playing. It's a 0 for 5. It says reveal the top card of your deck. Ravenous Rabble gets -X strength, where X is the pitch value of the card revealed this way. So if it's a red, this gets -1. Go again. So this can be and it often is, a 0 for 4, particularly if you can opt using a Fate Foreseen or a Skullbone Crosswrap activation to make sure that you've got a red on top, then you're sure that the Ravenous Rabble is going to be a 0 for 4. So it synergizes really nicely with opt, and it synergizes really nicely with the low resource curve we've got going on. And it's just another one of those generic, like Promise of Plenty, like Scour the Battlescapes, generic attacks that pairs really nicely with an arrow for a turn. So we get to go Ravenous Rabble, Promise of Plenty, or Scour the Battlescapes into an arrow. That's a pretty decent turn, particularly if we can find a way to buff that arrow. So how do we find ways to buff the arrow? Well, we use these cards that allow us to hit just a little bit harder. So Increase the Tension says your next arrow attack this turn gains +3 strength, and defense reactions can't be played from hand this chain link. So that's pretty good. Shuts down some of the cards they're going to be blocking with. And because of that ability, because this costs 1, like it's 1 for a +3, which is not the greatest rate, we really want to be bringing this one in against decks where we expect them to have defense reactions in hand. So decks like Bravo, decks like Ninja, they may be playing Flick Flack. Increase the Tension can be a lot stronger against those kind of decks. Nimblism, in contrast, is a 0 cost that still buffs for +3, so you get the same buff as Increase the Tension, but it costs 0. So this is the one that you probably want to main deck. It says the next attack action card with cost 1 or less you play this turn gains +3 strength. Now, almost every attack action in your deck costs 1 or less. All those arrows, all of the Go Again attacks, the neutral ones that we've played, that we've talked about rather, are all cost 1 or less. So Nimblism is just you play the card, you get a +3 buff on your next attack. That's great. It's exactly what we want. If our plan is to pair one of those neutral Go Again attacks with a powerful arrow, Nimblism just helps us to buff either of those attacks on our turn, just as your kind of regular turn plan. And we'll talk about building to big turns in a moment. Razor Reflex is another one. Obviously, being an attack reaction, it's a little more powerful because they have to declare their blocks before you get to play this. And not only does it give the attack +3 if it costs 1 or less, which as we said is basically everyone in our deck, but it says if this hits, the attack gains Go Again. And that can allow you to then play another arrow or another attack, which can be really, really powerful too. So card draw. This is something that Azalea can utilize really well, and something that we want to set up for on those bigger turns. So if our sort of standard turns look like one of those neutral attacks followed by an arrow, or maybe one arrow with a Razor Reflex followed by another arrow, the card draw cards let us play to even bigger turns. So 3 of a Kind is a ranger action that costs 1. It says draw 3 cards. Until end of turn, you may only play cards from Arsenal. So this works really nicely with being able to play this from hand and then already have an arrow or a reload card in Arsenal. And then we crack our bullseye braces at some point in the turn to put another arrow into the arsenal and get more use out of our turn, or another reload card into another arrow, or even, stacking and chaining reload cards into each other, and then arrow, and then bullseye braces for another attack into the arsenal, and then Go Again that way. And then Death Dealer for another card face up into the arsenal and Go Again that way. So using Death Dealer, bullseye braces, and starting with a reload card in your arsenal, like a Rapid Fire, means that a 3 of a Kind turn can easily turn into 3 attacks, which is really, really strong. One of them will be buffed by the Bullseye Braces, and you've obviously got more cards in your hand as well that you can play before you play the Three of a Kind. So say you could go Nimbleism, Three of a Kind. Your attack had already got a couple of buffs already beforehand. Or even if you play, for example, Poison the Tips or something else, if you haven't carried over an arsenal rapid fire, Poison the Tips or rapid fire, and then play a Three of a Kind, that sort of thing. You've got lots of options for playing things before you play the Three of a Kind, and then you've got the Death Dealer and the Bullseye Braces as ways to get things into arsenal without playing cards. So you're getting around the Three of a Kind's restriction on what you can play. So I hope that makes a bit of sense, but you can stack your pitch and stack your deck, or just wait until you draw things like a rapid fire and try and set up a good Three of a Kind turn. So I generally kind of try to have like one or two of these in your deck if you do want to try and utilize those sorts of cards and effects. Tome of Findle is another one. So you've got that one option with your Bullseye Braces and your Death Dealer as your equipment on that big turn with the Three of a Kind. But then you've also got Tome of Findle with Mage Master Boots. So it's just kind of this classic combo. So Mage Master Boots basically says you trash your Mage Master Boots, and the next action card you play, non-attack action, with cost 1 or less, gains you an additional action point. So basically gains Go Again. So Tome of Findle then allows you to draw 2 cards. If you've played it from your arsenal, which you will do because you can either reload it in there or set it up from the previous turn, you gain 1 life for each card in your hand. Very powerful effect, lets you kind of turn the race a little bit in your favor in a life gain sense. And then with your Mage Master Boots, you've still got your action, so you can still have your turn. And given our deck is really kind of themed around having at least 2 attacks, maybe 3 if we've got the right cards, having a couple of extra cards, or really 1 extra card from Tome, can allow us to optimize that and really have the best chance of having a 2 or 3 attack turn. Plus gain some life along the way. And as we mentioned, with the amount of reload cards and other ways to get a Tome into your arsenal for the start of your turn through a take cover or something else, you can actually increase the likelihood that you're going to be able to optimize it. And then, play it off your Tunic resource so you don't even have to pitch for it. Those sorts of things. Just opens up a lot more options for your deck and a lot more powerful plays. So card selection is something else that you can get. I mean, there's not a lot of it in Azalea, but Knock the Death Whistle is a really, really powerful tutor. So it's a blue, which is great because there aren't many blues that we want to be playing here. But Knock the Death Whistle is an effect we want, and the fact that it's blue is fantastic. So it's Azalea Specialization. It costs 0. Search your deck for an ARROV card, reveal it, shuffle your deck, and put it on top of your deck. Then reload. So that can be extremely powerful on a Three of a Kind turn. It can just be extremely powerful on a late game turn when you just need that red in the ledger against Chain, when you just need that Remorseless, when you need that Hamstring Shot or that Sleep Dart to kill the Leviathan. It doesn't go into your arsenal, but it goes on top of your deck. So you can then use Azalea to swap the card you reload with the Knock the Death Whistle for that card that you've just tutored and put on top and give that ARROV Dominate. So a very, very, very powerful piece of the Azalea puzzle, and one that lets you come in with just the threat you want on the turn when it matters. Fate Foreseen is another opt card as well that you can put in. So we've got Ridge Rider Shot, we've got the Skullbone Cross Wrap as an equipment, and then we've got Fate Foreseen, which also lets us opt. And then yes, the Skullbone Cross Wrap hanging out there in the background, which I mentioned earlier. So defense reactions are something that you, I think, really want in a lot of matchups with Azalea because you're not putting out heaps of damage. You're not necessarily putting out heaps of amazing effects and having these enormous turns all the time, although you can have some pretty big turns with Three of a Kind and Tome of Findle. But you're kind of trying to grind out this advantage over the course of the game. It's actually quite a grindy deck. And you want to just make your turns that little bit more efficient and make their turns that little bit less efficient. And if you can think about it that way, defense reactions can help you to block a little bit more efficiently, and then still hopefully be able to execute your 2 decent attacks into them on the following turn, hopefully with an on-hit effect that will disrupt them a bit. So Fate Foreseen, as we mentioned, is just that 0 for 4, good generic defense reaction. Sink Below, again, classic 0 for 4 from Welcome to Wraith, sees a lot of competitive play because just one card blocking for 4 can be so important. Feign Death can be just such an important one against Chain in particular on those later turns. Just being able to block a 9 strength Riftbind that's got all these buffs and this Howl from Beyond and its base damage, and you get to defend all that damage for 1 because either they've played a Seeds of Agony or they've dealt you some other damage earlier in the turn. It's just extremely powerful. So bring those 3 Feign Deaths in against Chain. It's not even a defense reaction; it's an instant. So it gets around a lot of other issues. You can stop a Command and Conquer, which they try and get you with as their last card. Their last attack after a big turn, well, you get to block the whole thing with 1 card. So that's great. Feign Death can be really, really powerful. And of course, I haven't got Take Cover on that slide, but Take Cover should absolutely be there. Red Take Cover, 0 for 4 defense reaction with reload. So you've got quite a few defensive options. They're not massive, they're not unmovables, they're not soul shields, they're not blocking heaps of damage, but they do let you try and grind out that advantage over the course of the game to be a bit more efficient than your opponent. Some flex slots to finish up, Command and Conquer, powerful generic. You just want to play it, like there's no problem, especially if you've got enough yellows. Just being able to, exchange profitably in a grindy deck, Command and Conquer is exactly the kind of card that just gets you that more efficient resource trade over your opponent at the key point in the game when you want to. Enlightened Strike, again, don't really need to sing its praises. Efficient, powerful, lets you stack the bottom of your deck, very flexible, and fits really nicely into a deck where we're trying to use generics to get a go again attack so that we can then follow up with an arrow, or just finish with a powerful attack after playing one of our go again arrows, or even get that 3rd attack for the turn in. Lead the Charge is one that you can play if you want to play more Tome of Findle, because it's one of the only other ways that you can get an action point for your Tome of Findle, but it is a bit more finicky. It is a bit better in this deck than in most because you can stack your pitch a bit better, so you can pitch this and then maybe pitch a tome if you want to, the 2nd or 3rd tome that you draw. It's a bit iffy. I wouldn't necessarily play it, but because you get rewarded for pitching yellows with Death Dealer, it does get a little bit better. So on the equipment side of things, we've already talked about most of these. Final Spring Tunic, really important. With a low resource curve, it lets you get a free Death Dealer. Basically, you can turn that 1 resource off Tunic into a card, which is massive. That's just card advantage off your Tunic resource. Amazing. In the purest sense. It's always card advantage to an extent, but Death Dealer lets you 100% turn that into a whole new card, a fresh new card, which is great. Bullseye Braces, very powerful on those 3 of a kind turns, and just generally on those turns, turning 1 big turn in the game. Skullbone Crosstrap, just giving you that incidental advantage and card selection throughout the course of the game off your reloads and your natural arsenals. And then Mage Master Boots in the boot slot synergizes really well, combos with Tome of Findle. I like them. There are a few other options though. You've got the 2-block Blade Break in Perch Grapplers, which can give you just that little bit of extra armor, because we've got only Blade Breaks in our armor slots, but having the 2 extra life basically in the game can be nice, although I would argue probably playing Tome and Mage Master Boots is going to give you that anyway. So I generally prefer the Tome and the Mage Master Boots combo. Budget options for equipment. This is basically the no legendaries version, so replacing the Skullbone Crosswrap with a Talismanic Lens, which gives you a one-off opt on a key turn when you want to use Azalea's ability, and Heartened Crossstrap instead of Tunic. But I would say, given that Azalea is quite complicated and a little bit fragile in terms of that, the resource advantage, right? If your game plan is to, as I said, be slightly more efficient than your opponent and disrupt them a little bit, the loss of efficiency from losing Tunic and losing Skullbone Crossstrap can hurt a bit. So if you can get the Tunic and the Skullbone Crossstrap, give it a go. But Heartened Crossstrap and Talismanic Lens do a reasonable impersonation of those 2 effects, albeit only on a one-off basis. But your deck can absolutely still function with these 2 as budget options. Vest of the First Fist is another one. When attack action you control hits, you can trash it to gain 2. So it is a little bit more awkward because it can't fuel your first action, but it can give you 2 resources spread across 2 cards. And given we don't have many things that cost 2, which makes the Heartened Crossstrap, I should say, not as good, having the Vest of the First Fist is kind of nice because it actually gives you 2 resources that you can spread across 2 different cards. So in summary, We want to balance our ability to go again and our arrows. Now that go again can come from some of our arrows, but it also generally comes from those generics. So things like I've had a brain fade, Enlightened Strike, Promise of Plenty, Scour the Battlescape, and Ravenous Rabble are kind of your key go-agains, and then obviously some of your arrows, as well as your rapid-fire turns. So you've got ways to get go-again generically, ways to give your arrows go-again, and then obviously having your arrows to deploy using your Death Dealer consistently is quite important. Utilize your key arrows, use your Knock the Death Whistles, use your just general card selection through your opts to set up things like a Red in the Ledger on the key turns where they're appropriate and important, sleep darts, things like that. Set up your big turns with your 3 of a kinds and your tomes if you do choose to play a build with them. It doesn't necessarily have to be a pitch stack. It can also just be about arsenaling the right card, thinking about how you block to most effectively leverage those big turns, and using your equipment, as I mentioned, on the appropriate turn. Keep up the pressure to get their life low. Don't allow the game to become too much. You're not going to win by blocking out with your whole hand all the time. You've got to set up a board state where you're trading. Even if sometimes you feel like you're trading a little bit inefficiently, still getting a bit of damage off them is quite important, so that when you try and set up some big dominate arrows later in the game, it's actually impactful. You know, when you try and set up some of those big disruptive arrows later in the game, you're actually disrupting them to the extent where you can generate some momentum. But that's really hard to judge. Obviously, because you're trying to block profitably and trade resources profitably, you don't want to just, take 20 damage in a turn and then come back with 10. If you're assessing that that's how it's looking, maybe it is right to block out with your hand this turn, or maybe it is right to block a bit more. But make sure that you're focusing on the next point in the game where you can take a bit of damage and hopefully hit them back harder. And when you're constructing your deck, try and create enough offensive potential that you can find those moments when you're going to be able to hit them back harder. Because if you can't do that, and if you can't have those pivot turns, then the deck's not really going to function. It's not going to win many games. Sideboard to disrupt or go wide. If you think you're going to be in a matchup where you need to be getting more go again and more action points, bring in some more of those cards that are going to allow you to do that, whether it's rapid fires, whether it's arrows with go again. If you think you need to disrupt more, bring in those sleep darts, bring in those hamstring shots, and really focus on having those in your deck and crafting your game plan around those. So that's just an intro to Ranger and to Azalea. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. It's a class that I absolutely love playing, and I love the deck building puzzle that it presents. Let me know what you think in the comments. Azalea players and Azalea mains out there, let me know if you think there's something that I've missed. But for those of you who have heard, Azalea is unplayable, or you should never play Azalea, don't take it to a tournament, hopefully this video has given you a little bit of confidence that there are some really powerful things and unique things out there that Azalea can do, and a bit of insight into how you might go about crafting your deck. So thanks for watching. I've been Jesse Marshall for The Winning Agenda. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel, and I'll be back with more hero spotlights in the future. Cheers.